Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Work Plus Life Connections Real Talk. And Elder Care is also helping with the Real Talk. I wish we could start over because I really don't like the way I introduced that. But anyway, we're live, so here we go. I do want you to know that we are recording this, so we ask that you put your questions in the chat box for confidentiality because we will be putting this on the Work Life YouTube page. So if you missed some important information that we happen to talk about, you can go and listen to it again. So today our topic is anxiety. And I'm guessing that you're all here because you love somebody with anxiety, or you've been living in this pandemic lately. And we've seen an increase in anxiety from almost everybody. And so we want to talk a little bit about anxiety in the pandemic and also anxiety in general. So let me introduce the panel. First, Rhonda, do you want to raise your hand? Rhonda is one of our work-life therapists. She has been at UK for quite some time, and she likes all things arts and crafts, but she also knows about anxiety. And then Terry is if Terry will raise her hand, she's giving you away. Terry is our elder care specialist, and she knows all stuff about elder care. She works remotely, always has, from Wisconsin. So she's coming a long way to be with us, and she can answer any of your questions if you are a caregiver or you are concerned about one of your elders that might have some anxiety. Eric, over here, you'll notice he's the only male on the panel, but he too is a work-life therapist. He is one of our newer members, and we're really glad to have him. If you want to know about mindfulness, Eric's your guy, but he's also going to talk a little bit about how mindfulness can help anxiety, but also he knows other things about anxiety as well. And then finally, Cindy, over there where it says Dream, she is also a Work Plus Life Connections therapist and one of our newer members. So Cindy has a lot of training in trauma and different backgrounds. So we've all got a lot of different specialties. My name is Ann Bassoni. I am a Work Plus Life Connections therapist as well, not at the well, as well. And I'm going to be moderating this because some people think I'm funny. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. So we have some questions that people have sent to us before, and what I'm going to do is just toss out this first one just to get us going. But feel free to start putting in your questions, and I will be looking for them and letting people in if they're coming late. And please feel free to ask any questions because, like I said, anxiety is at an all-time high, and we really want to. I should say that if any of this resonates with you, or you feel like, I think I need somebody to talk to, you can come to the Work Plus Life Connections program where you get 5 free confidential visits. If you visit us, it doesn't go in your personnel file. It doesn't go in your your medical record. It's a completely confidential service. And most people think we're pretty helpful. And if you have any questions about elder care, about how to help, your elders, or you're concerned about a parent you don't know what to do, Terry is the one for you. She will help you find resources, narrow them down for you, and give them to you, and really take a lot of the time and energy that you need to find the services away. So, first question, panelists, and I'm glad somebody asked this, is that can you tell us what the difference is between anxiety and being a worrier or worrying? So whoever wants to jump in, go for it. I'm talking to the panelists.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Well, I've always heard that anxiety is the reaction to worrying. It's, how you're responding. It's, you've heard anxiety attacks and panic attacks and things like that. You don't really hear so much about worry attacks. You worry, you stress, and if it builds up and builds up, it could lead to something such as an anxiety attack, which is a reaction to all this stress and worry we carry around.
Okay.
I would just add that I think of worrying as being much more thoughts and cognitive tends to be specific. We worry about specific things, where anxiety is often experienced in our body as a feeling, feelings of nervousness or tension, or increased heart rate. So I feel like there's an embodied aspect to anxiety, a feeling that goes beyond just specific cognitive thoughts or concerns.
Like my stomach gets really upset when I'm feeling anxious. That kind of thing. Some people get headaches and things like that. Anybody else have any thoughts about the difference, Cindy or Rondi?
Well, I guess what comes up for me, I've done a lot of reading about this lately. I think that they can be the same thing, kind of being nervous, like people describe anxiety as feeling nervous. I think the difference is that worry typically happens around like an event or something that has happened that, is absolutely normal to worry about. And can actually kind of propel you into kind of a problem solving phase and can be productive in your life. Like, if this thing, thing A happens, I'm worried about it. And then it might lead you to start thinking about ways to solve that problem or ways to address the thing that happened. Anxiety, I think, is when worry kicks into overdrive and you have a hard time not being productive. Because you can't move out of that worried place. It's sort of paralyzing and pulls you away from doing anything proactive or productive with it, and often is not connected with any event or something that's going on. It's just something that pops in your brain that takes you down that route that often involves those physical symptoms and things like that. So,
Right.
my 2 cents.
Excellent. All right. Come on, people. I know you got questions. Let's start. Oh, here we go. This question is about feeling anxious lately when they're reading the news. And I think we've all, our exposure to social media, the news on TV, reading in paper and magazines. She said that she's tried to cut back on how often she looks at it, but she's still feeling anxious when she looks at the news. And I think Rhonda has a response to that.
I do.
Rhonda's hand shot up in the air.
Yeah, I
It
sure
did
did.
shoot in the air because I can relate to that, man. I'm a news junkie and I'm a political junkie and I'm invested in social justice. So this is a hard time to be watching the news. One thing that I've been talking with folks about over the last few months is really being aware, not just of limiting maybe the amount of news, but thinking about it and kind of examining what type of news or what format you're taking news in. What I've found is sometimes news with images is just too much. I can read something and sort of take in if I feel like I need to get updated in some way. Reading is very different for me than watching the news. And then sometimes I've really went to podcasts for a lot of news. When I want to hear discussion, it's just easier than getting the visuals too. So thinking about, all the different ways that information kind of comes in and what sticks with us. I'm a real visual person. That's a way that I learn and I like to experience things. But what I realized is that lets the news get in too deep with me, seeing people's faces, seeing that struggle. And so being able to read it or just listen to a podcast has been a little easier for me to manage, along with limiting time, of course.
So if you watch news, it just seems to resonate more with you. So you found a way that
Too much sensory input.
You're getting the information, but it's not so much sensory overload.
Yeah, that's helped me anyway.
Anybody else?
The thing that came up for me, I think I am not a news junkie. I can get in those spaces, but there are certain things that I am passionate about. And right now is a really hard time. So I think I may be the opposite form of Rhonda. Like, I'm like, I need the video, I need the thing. But also I have started to pay attention to the sources that I get news from and really axing a lot of that out if I'm on social media, because I think it's a goal to get you fired up. And I think some things just report the news, and it's not inflammatory in any way. It's not trying to get an emotional rise out of anybody in any way. So I have weeded down those sources that I will go to and read when I want to, that I feel like don't bring all that emotion up in me. It brings some emotion, obviously, because I care about it. But I think to pay attention to what is too much. And I've encouraged people, especially around COVID, like, when was the last time you read something that gave you new information? Know what you need to know and what you want to know, but when you're getting into reading and reading and reading and it's just creating anxiety or worry, be like, when was the last time that I really read something that gave me new information? Or, you know, and maybe you don't need to read all those things unless there's something new, or pretty limited if it's making you more and more fearful of what's going on.
And I would add to that too, that I try not to look at the news immediately after an event, because oftentimes it's just, there's not a whole lot of facts to it. Like, where was that, what country was it in, where down by the shipyard, the building exploded? I was just listening to something, and it's, you know, and in my head I thought terrorist attack, and that was not the case at all. So sometimes it's best to let it go for a day so people can gather facts, so you can get the correct information. Any other responses to that? We have another question.
I have two more cents that will be really short. I think the other thing is knowing that certain things that we watch, we may feel a responsibility to watch or see, and giving ourselves some grace that we can be invested in something. And I'm thinking in particular about some of the videos showing violence against Black people in our country, honestly, that we don't, it's okay to give yourself permission to step back from that or from watching that. It doesn't mean that you're not invested, that you don't care, that you don't want to understand or learn, but it's traumatizing to watch some of these things.
Great.
One way
Another question.
to, oh,
Go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to say, sometimes I know that the news is incredibly exciting now. I am not particularly a news junkie, but I live with a 24-hour-a-day news junkie, and that can just drive me absolutely out of the wall. So sometimes, and I've done this in the past, although COVID has kind of got me a little more locked down, things that upset me, I try to do something about. You know, if I see news articles about, you know, kids being hungry because schools are shut down, see if you can work at a pantry. You know, do something about it. See if you can get out and do something about it. You're talking about shelters and dogs. You know, see if you can volunteer to go to the shelter and walk a dog. You know, wear a mask, you know, garb up, whatever you need to do. But you're outside, you can walk one of the shelter dogs. Sometimes taking action kind of helps bring that level down a little bit.
Good point, yeah. We have another question that asks, what's the difference between anxiety and depression?
That's a good one.
Oh, is it? They're thinking, guys. Give them a second.
Well, I'll share some of the differences. I mean, we did talk about, we kind of started opened with just that anxiety is usually associated with feelings of worry and restlessness. It tends to be global, meaning that we experience it about different things. It can present, again, I stress the physical symptoms of like the sweaty palms or the upset stomach or, you know, the shortness of breath. But it's, you know, it's just this feeling. I often think of the term, a lot of us have anxiety about the future. And if you think about that, that's, the future is a very broad subject, right? It speaks to this global feeling that something could go wrong. You know, anxious thoughts are often driven by the question of what if this happens? And our mind is great at generating those what if scenarios. When I think of depression, I think of that feeling of being hopeless, of you know, low energy. You suddenly have difficulty finding any joy in life. You know, there may be some thoughts of self-harm or suicidality. You may just be thinking about death a lot. There may be this pervasive, deep sadness. There's a tendency to really isolate yourself. So those are some of the differences I see between depression and anxiety.
Thank you. And I think if you'll note there in Eric's answer, he also described some of the symptoms of anxiety, which sometimes we're not sure, you know, if this is anxiety or not. A great question here. How do you support staff who express anxiety with projects restarting and tasks picking back up? So I'm assuming that if things have slowed down because of COVID and you've been working from home and now things are starting to pick up, business is starting to pick up, how would you suggest someone, it sounds like a supervisor maybe or a coworker could help someone who is nervous about restarting things?
I often find it's helpful to move into action. You know, I think Eric gave such a great description of that anxiety, depression, sort of some of the aspects of those. And so, you know, I think it's easy to get really stuck in the thoughts and the worry of what's to come, or, you know, can I do it, or feeling overwhelmed. So being able to break it down a little bit, and I think one of the easiest places to start is make a list, you know, helping them, and that somebody that you're supervising, you know, maybe working with them in terms of asking questions. You know, first I would ask what would be helpful, because they may have an idea of like, yeah, if I can just figure out what to put on the back burner and what to focus on, then I'm okay. So they may have an idea, and if they don't, if they just are kind of lost, starting with how do we break this down? You know, where's the starting point? How do we start bringing some structure to it? Because I think, you know, we all can get in that place where sort of there's these swirling ideas and worries and thoughts. And if we can bring a little structure and have a starting point, I think it makes it a little bit easier to get some traction. You know, if we can get some traction, if we can make a little bit of progress, then we can feel sort of a little more confident, you know, that we're moving along. But I think it's great that you're wanting to work with somebody that you're supervising to try to help support them through that.
So in other words, you don't just tell them to quit worrying about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stop it.
And I tell you, I think that's one of the biggest things we hear from some of our clients is that when people don't understand that anxiety, they're like, oh, there's nothing to worry about, but they are worrying about it and they are feeling anxious about it at times. So that telling them to stop or not is not very helpful. And I think those were some good suggestions. Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Well, I had Ann something similar to you. I think, you know, an employee that's coming to their supervisor and saying, you know, I'm really feeling anxious or worried about this. I think it speaks, you know, to the relationship, but I think the best thing you can do for people who are feeling that way is to validate that, you know, it must be awful to come to work and feel that way every day. And to then, you know, go the next step and saying, you know, what support can I offer you? Do you want me to check in? Do you not want me to check in? Kind of what is most helpful for them? Because I think a lot of times for people who experience anxiety, it's kind of can often set in this paralysis of it's not really, I can't do the work or I'm not able to do the work. It's like, I don't know where to start. And how you help people with that is like really knowing, is it helpful for me to check in or is it more helpful for me to back off? Like, now that you've told me, what do you need me to do? You know, and just kind of letting them write their, you know, have a say in their prescription, so to speak, you know. But I think to validate and to express appreciation that they felt good enough with the vulnerability to share that is a lot of what would just set that anxiety at ease to some extent.
You know, to take off on that, it's sometimes I think people or maybe even some supervisors may see that as a sign of weakness. You know, this person isn't a strong employee. This person isn't a strong. That has nothing to do with being weak. It just means that something's out of balance. And, you know, to try to get things back into balance by, as you guys have suggested, you know, making a to-do list, validating what they're saying, you know, helping them get back on track. And then also promoting some self-care, you know, how are you doing to, you know, what are you doing to do some self-care type stuff? Sometimes getting away from everything and getting out of your head for a while can kind of clear things up a little bit.
And I think that's a really good point. And I was telling Rhonda earlier about, be watching for this with your kids too in school. I was talking to a senior in high school yesterday, and she was really anxious about some stuff, and we had to do some problem solving. And she hadn't talked to her mom about it, but she was just saying, all the teachers do things differently. I'm not sure where this is and where that is. And basically what she was doing was just winging it. And that was creating more anxiety. So we just step by step figured out a plan for how to help her figure that out. And, along that line, because things are very different now. And, I think we hear people say, well, when we go back to normal, and I think we've all kind of can agree that it's not going to be normal. It's going to be very different. And we have someone saying, that because of COVID, they lost a lot of people in their office. And as a result, there's a lot more work, and she feels like most of them can handle, there's a lot of work, and it's overwhelming. And saying we have a hard time keeping up and get anxious dealing with the amount of work and switching between competing demands and not making mistakes. The anxiety comes from not knowing if their workload will ever lighten up, and being a person who checks her work very carefully and feeling anxious that I might make a mistake. So if you guys were talking to somebody like that, what are some tips you would give someone for managing the anxiety of increased workload, loss of coworkers? And I know for a lot of us at UK, there's also this sense of, can I lose my job? Will I lose my job? What's going to happen next? So do y'all have some tips for managing that anxiety? No, they don't. You guys are just going to have to be anxious. What I like about this panel is we all have some different ideas about managing anxiety. So, if one doesn't resonate with you, listen a little bit longer, because somebody might tell you something that does.
I'm just going back to the self-care thing, try to take care of yourself. If you need to speak to somebody, hello, we've got, 4 counselors right here for you, 5 free visits. Do what feels good for you, take some time away. I think self-care is a big, important part of that.
Can one of you guys expand on self-care? I mean, what does self-care look like? It's a term we hear. And I think, we think of the common ones like get a massage, take a bath, things like that. Not take a bath.
I was going to say.
We take baths a lot. But what are some ideas for self-care maybe that people might not think about?
I think, when we talk about self-care, I think of it as a little bit broader than, like you said, just the, light a candle, take a bubble bath. I mean, those are fine things. And if that's part of your self-care, I think that's lovely. But what we really want to do is be thinking about what's going to help balance out some of the strains that are in our life. And for some folks, different people have different self-care needs, and different people have different self-care needs at different points. So sometimes you may need that more calming, comforting, doing something where you're away from people, going for a walk outside by yourself, or reading a book, snuggling up with a blanket. Sometimes you may need to discharge some energy. You may be feeling a lot of frustration. The anxiety may feel really active and overwhelming, and you need to do something where you're active. And so you get outside, you do some physical activity, you work in your garden, you take a dog for a walk, those things that get you moving a little bit. So I think it's really kind of balancing out, what's the strain on me? For me, an example I give a lot when we do presentations about this is it might feel, when I get done with my work day, I sit here in front of the computer all day. My body gets tight. I get tired of sitting in this spot. I get tired of being in this room. And when I get done, some days what I want to do is grab like the bag of chips on the way to the couch and sit down, and I'm out and I'm done. And that's what I'm doing. And that might feel good in the moment, but that's really a little more towards self-indulgence, honestly, than self-care, which can be fine. Again, I can have a few minutes of that too. But really what I need for self-care at that point is to get up and move my body some, to probably stretch a little bit for my back, to walk outside and not be looking at any screens, not my phone, not my TV. So that's, self-care, using that to balance what's been going on for me at that time. So I think, getting in touch with where does that show up in our body? Eric made such a good point, I think, earlier about anxiety, to me, just sets so much in our body. What are those things that can give me some relief from that? Either by movement, by relaxation, massage, all those different things, but kind of figuring out what works for you.
That's a good point. So your self-care kind of goes with maybe some of the symptoms that you're feeling.
That's how I like to think about it. I mean, that helps me. What do you want? What's everybody else think?
Well, and so can I just wanted to speak just to the last part of that question. I think that that final statement, that the anxiety comes from not knowing if the workload will lighten up, and being a person who checks her work very carefully and feeling anxious that I might make a mistake. I think so many of us experience elevated anxiety when we have unrealistic expectations for ourselves, that we have to be perfect. And reminding yourself that the world's not perfect and I'm not perfect, and I will do the best that I can, and that's good enough. Holding yourself to a standard that your work has to be perfect, especially when you're taking on new projects or work that is typically done by more than one person, you are going to make mistakes. I mean, the dignity in your work is that you mentioned that there's less staff. So, just giving yourself that kindness, that compassion, that I'm not always going to be perfect. I'll do the best that I can with this, I think is really important to acknowledge that. And the other thing is we underestimate our ability to do things. We often feel like, well, I'm not going to be able to handle this. But I like to remind myself, trust myself that whatever arises, I can hold. Whatever experiences arise, I can hold. I can handle. I'll do the best that I can, but I'm not going to be overwhelmed. There's kind of just, we underestimate ourselves, is a point I want to make. And so that on the one hand, we tend to hold unrealistic expectations that we have to be perfect under all circumstances, even when we're taking on new projects. And on the other hand, we tend to underestimate our ability. Most of us have been in situations where we faced adversity before. So reminding yourself, there have been times where I've had deadlines or difficult struggles, a lot of work thrown at me, and I handled it before. I was able to handle it then, and I'll be able to handle it now.
I think that's a great point, because, one thing I wish was that workplaces would encourage people to make mistakes, because oftentimes that's how I learn best, is when I've made a mistake, and how am I going to do it differently? What do I need to do to make it turn out different last time? And I think, Eric, that idea of it's got to be perfect puts way too much pressure, because we know as an absolute that's impossible. It's not going to be perfect. And I think that's where you need a supportive supervisor. Maybe you say, here's what's going on. I feel like it has to be perfect. I feel like, and have that communication going, so that maybe you can get some reassurance, and hopefully the supervisor doesn't say, well, yeah, it does have to be perfect, because I don't think anybody expects that.
Can I add one more point, Anne? I think the other thing that the question, just kind of reading the full question, brings up for me is one of those kind of core tools that I like to use, which is just the simple question of what can I control, what can I not? Really being able to start dividing some of those things out. And, often I find anxiety is coming from trying and worrying about things that are often out of our control. They're either unpredictable, or we're not the ones in the decision-making role. And so we have all this anxiety that can build up. And I find, truly just drawing the circle and writing it out, putting words, getting it out of my thoughts and onto the paper. What can I control? What can I not? And a lot of times it may feel in an overwhelming situation like I can't control much of anything about it. But when we kind of dig in a little bit, I think that's when we start finding some of the things that we can't control. And that may just be, what's my reaction to it? How much time do I give it in my off hours? Do I sit and talk about this at night when I'm home with my family? Am I increasing those self-care activities? Those might be the things you can control. The big question marks of when are other staff going to be hired, or what's that workload going to look like? Those might be unanswerable questions in that moment, but I think at least looking at what I can and can't control lets me refocus a little bit on something that feels productive.
Right. Okay. Let's see. What are some questions? What is your favorite technique to stop feeling anxious, or to manage? Because we can't always stop it, but how do we manage it? Cindy, what's one of your favorite techniques?
So yeah, I'm glad you went back and changed it to manage, because I think Um, I am very much a person that anxiety is something I think that if people experience it, they don't like that part of themselves, that anxious part. But I always try and encourage people that anxiety is our internal alarm system and it's there for a reason, and maybe it's haywire and maybe it's not needed, but it's there. And so this is kind of woo woo and weird, but to like in the moment, like I'm gonna, like acknowledge the anxiety. Okay, you're here. This is coming up for me for a reason. I'm not gonna try and push this out, because the stronger you push against it, the harder it comes back, because there's some part of your brain that is like, no, you really need to look out for the dinosaur that's about to eat you. And it's not true, but the more you try and push it out, the stronger it becomes. And so I really try to help folks that I see, and have done so in my own life, to really kind of have a working relationship with that anxiety, and just to kind of know that it's there, and know that I'm not going to die. I've been there before. I've felt it before, and I can do whatever the thing is that I need to do. Does it feel bad? Yeah. But is it the end of the world? No. But probably my go-to thing is breathing. And I know people are like, do not tell me to breathe. Breathing is good. It grounds us. I like to be outside. I think breathing actual air is better than breathing the air-conditioned air from inside our houses, and just, having a temperature shift, having a change, just helps. And to know, like, it's temporary. It's not going to last forever. It's temporary.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what Erica was saying of do I have the capacity to handle it? And it's how we are appraising the situation of, have I experienced it before? What are my resources? Do I have people that can help? How have I overcome this in the past? So I think that's a good suggestion. Who else has a favorite? Or one they would like to share?
Well, I love what Cindy just said. And I like to remind myself that when I experience anxiety, this too has a place. I say that to myself. This too has a place. Anxiety can often be adaptive. I mean, the classic studies, when they look at public speakers and they see who are the best public speakers, the best public speakers have a moderate amount of anxiety when they're doing public speaking. The worst public speakers are the people who have no anxiety. They're actually worse than the speakers with major anxiety. So there's this kind of sweet spot of anxiety, which it is, as Cindy was just saying, it's alerting us to something or moving us to something. And so I first say this anxiety has a place, and then I become curious about it. And as soon as I shift to become curious about it, in a lot of mindfulness practice, we'll talk about the idea of befriending your anxiety, inviting your anxiety in for a cup of tea, present and sitting with that anxiety. Not only does that intentional presence to befriend your anxiety or to welcome it in, not only does it tend to dissipate in its intensity, but you also often will get insights about something that's important to you, or maybe this is connecting to some deep down value system within you. So it can be source of insight. And then for me, I notice that for me, if I'm experiencing anxiety, it's usually when my mind is wandering into the future and I'm thinking a lot in terms of what if, and imagining things that can go wrong. So similar to what Cindy said, she uses breathing. Any kind of sensory, physical experience that I can engage in that brings me into my body and into the present moment, pulls me out of my head, then I'm suddenly start to feel calmer. And we know that when you connect with your breathing, like Cindy was talking about, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is very calming. Particularly if you can just follow your breath for at a minimum of 9 minutes. So there's real benefits to that. But as everyone on the panel knows, I often like to just go outside and just connect with my physical senses through the sun, the wind connecting with the flowers and the trees that I see, the dogs that people are walking, the things I smell. I love to look at the architecture and houses, notice how my feet feel on the concrete. All these sensory experiences, again, pull me into the present moment, because when my mind wanders into the future, that's when I'm really at risk for a lot of anxiety thinking.
Yeah, if we ever can't find Eric, we just go looking in a field and he's going to be out there somewhere. No, I think that's one of your strengths, Eric, is that you are very present a lot of times. Like you said, like, what do my feet feel like on the ground? What is the temperature around me? So that kind of mindfulness and noting what's happening right now. Where am I right now? Because that takes you out of the future and it takes you out of the past. What's that thing then? It's the gift of the moment. Rhonda, do you have a favorite besides arts and crafts?
I'm going to go back and build on Cindy's breathing piece, because that's definitely the one that I think is most effective. And I'm going to just acknowledge that my own struggle, because I was one of those people years ago who was like, don't tell me to breathe. I'm too anxious to breathe. You know, and I struggled there a little bit. And what I found for me, and what I found for a lot of clients I work with that help sort of get over that hump a little bit, was I find it useful to understand and to learn a little more about why that works. Because once, to me, you dig in just a little bit deeper and understand, Eric mentioned the parasympathetic nervous system. If you understand that sympathetic, parasympathetic system and what's going on in your body, you know, I'm somebody who, if I go to the doctor and they just say, oh, do this thing because I'm telling you to do this thing, I'm not going to do the thing. But if they take a minute and they educate me, because I'm stubborn, but if they take a minute and they educate me and say, when you do this, here's the benefit. And if you don't do this, this is what's happening. Okay, like if I can be a part of that, then I'm going to stick with it. I find the breathing piece, again, which sounds so simple, but I think is so important. I find that similar. Like if you can understand what is it that's happening in your brain, what are the chemicals that are being produced in your body, what's cortisol happening, what's that causing to happen inside you. If you can understand that and then see what that benefit of the breathing is, that it isn't just, oh, that feels good in this moment, I've taken 2 breaths, you know, let's move on with the day. But I realize what it's doing to me physiologically, that's made it, to me, just make a lot more sense. It's made it so that, like, I will stick with it, I will do the thing. And what I found for a lot of clients I work with, that's the same for them. You know, once they sort of understood what was going on and they felt the purpose and what was happening, they were able to stick to it a little bit more. But yeah, breathing for the win for me.
Thank you, Stubborn Rhonda.
Breathing for
building on building on that, when if you all have clients come to you, at what point would you, knowing that we're not doctors, psychiatrists, at what point would you say maybe you want to try medication?
Let's see. So my take on medication is, when folks ask me about it, I'm very much like, I respect that you do or don't want to take medication. That's up to you. It's out there, but the way I describe it is sometimes depression and anxiety go hand in hand, and often if depression gets a little better, anxiety will come back loud and proud, because it's like, oh, now you have space for me. You can feel again, so you about to feel me. And what I think that medication can do, I describe it as rounding the sharp edges off the table in the middle of the room. You know, your grandma's coffee table when you were little, like, it rounds off the edges. It doesn't take things away, but it gives you the space to be able to try to breathe. So if anxiety or panic is so acute so often that you can't form a cognitive thought, you can't function, you have a hard time sleeping, like you don't even have the bandwidth to think about, let me take a breath or let me go take a walk. Like, I think that medicine could be a good idea, and it doesn't mean it's forever. It means that it's going to shave off those corners so that you can have the space to learn the skills, so that you may or may not, you know, it's up to you. Like, everybody's different, be able to get rid of the meds or decrease the meds or whatever.
Right.
I would just add, one of the things that I stress to folks is that if someone had, first of all, there's a difference between experiencing anxiety and an anxiety disorder. Everybody experiences anxiety. So when does it become a disorder? If it's really interfering with your day-to-day living, your ability to concentrate, your ability to socialize or spend time with friends, your ability to get, work done in school or at work. So, anxiety. So I think some people feel we're never supposed to have anxiety. All human beings have anxiety. So then if the anxiety symptoms hit the threshold of an anxiety disorder, I often talk with people in terms of whether it's mild, moderate, and severe. If it's a mild anxiety disorder, then there's really strong research that supports behavioral changes. It could be improving sleep, increasing exercise, learning new coping skills like some of the things we've been talking about, that these things are actually more effective than medication. If it's moderate anxiety, then I think it starts to be, you can make a stronger case that there may be some benefits for it. But again, most of the clients I work with often prefer to try to do some behavioral changes or learn some new coping skills or some new ways of thinking first. And finally, if somebody has a severe anxiety disorder, then I usually do recommend they consider a consultation with a psychiatrist, because that's when you reach that level of a severe anxiety disorder where it's hard to leave the house, or you are completely isolated, or you can't concentrate and get anything done at work. When it reaches that severe level, it's really debilitating. And like Cindy was pointing out, in that situation, kind of dampening down the anxiety can help you to start to learn some of those new behaviors and coping skills. So that's kind of how I work with it, but it's always a individual decision by the client.
And I'll hear some folks who express, worry about what medication is going to be like, especially if they've never tried, anything like that before. And they don't want to be a zombie. They don't want to be so zoned out that they aren't able to enjoy things or feel things. And, one thing I just talked to them about is, if you find that right medication and good, correct dosage, it shouldn't be that way. If somebody is zoned out and not feeling their feelings, they're over medicated or they're on something that's not working for them appropriately. But it should be that it sort of lifts the floor a little bit. It makes it a little easier to get unstuck. Like Eric was saying, easier to use some of those sort of behavioral kind of tools that we were talking about. But I think, if you've got that fear, talk to your doctor about it. Express what the worry is. I think some people worry, am I going to be seen as, med seeking in some way? And, I think we've heard from a whole lot of folks that, especially during this last 6 months, some folks have had to try medication for the first time just because they found that maybe things they were doing before just weren't quite as effective, or the demand was too much. But, talk to your doctor, express what the concern is, and they can start you on a really low dose with something and see how that goes.
And I would like to add, if you have the resources, I would encourage, especially if you have had ongoing anxiety, if it's been a chronic issue for you, if it's like a thing that you may try to work to manage, had throughout a lot of your life, take the leap, go to a psychiatrist or a psych nurse practitioner, because that, like, your brain is what they're trained in, and your primary care provider can absolutely help you, give you medication, that thing, but their job is to keep your whole body in order. And so they know lots of things, but that isn't their specialty. So if you're struggling, that medication roller coaster can be brutal. And if you don't have to go through that, I think it's helpful, because it gets a lot of people in a place where they give up, and it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. So that's my plug for going to the professional.
And I would add on to that oftentimes if you see a psychiatrist and you elect to start medication, for the first few months, you might have to go back every month, while they figure out the dosage in that. And then once you find something, a level that works, then the visit starts spacing out more, and it's not so expensive. But I do like, Cindy, you're pointing out that, for psychiatrists and nurse practitioner, I mean, that's their field. So they definitely are up on current research and medications and things like that.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Hopefully, yeah. And folks, if you've got questions, I'm pulling from the ones we got earlier, but feel free to ask through the chat room. One, I you know, some of you I see, I know your names and I know you have kids. Does anxiety and worry look different in children than it does, say, maybe in our elders or, you know, us adults, teens? What are we looking for in children and teens or in our elders? I'm not an elder yet, so just don't go there.
The one thing that can look different is often depression or anxiety will present itself as irritability, I think, in those two extremes in kids and definitely teenagers and also in elders. So that real strong irritability that seems to come from nowhere, or you don't know what it's connected to, or people don't want to talk about or can't talk about or just don't know. I think that can often be a sign. And little kids, it shows up in different ways. Like little kids, I feel strongly like they are our mirrors. Whatever you're going through, that child is going to throw it right back at you. And then we're like, what's wrong with my child? Oh, because you're anxious. So I think it's important to, you know, whatever helps you, whatever breathing skill helps you. If kids get anxious or, you know, throwing tantrums, or it'll show up in behaviors, it'll show up in disruption in sleep, a lot of the same ways as it shows in us, but they just don't have the language around it. So it's going to be hardcore strong in the behaviors, in my experience.
Yeah, because I think that, you know, what I see a lot is they talk about the symptoms. They talk about the physical stuff that they're feeling. So it'll be, you know, my stomach hurts, or, you know, my head hurts, or, you know, I can't sleep. I mean, there will be those behaviors because those are identifiable, especially with the littler ones when they can't put words to it. Yeah.
Or they may withdraw, or they may avoid, or something that they really used to do, like they don't so much anymore, or things like that. So.
And Eric, one thing I know that you incorporate at times is having them draw or some play stuff. What would you see if the kid was drawing or playing that might make you think maybe they're feeling anxious or an anxiety disorder?
Well, so just in especially in play, children communicate so much through their play, as well as through, like Dan said, through their drawing. So just pay attention to the themes of their play. You know, do the themes speak to danger or consistent lack of safety? To drawings as well. And I think that you don't want to overinterpret and assume, well, this is what this means. You know, plenty of kids watch a scary movie and then they start, you know, engaging in play that's scary. You know, part of childhood is using play to master your fears, to embrace your fears. But what I would be curious about, if I see repetition in play around themes of, you know, lack of safety or danger, or if I was to notice that as a theme, I would just ask questions. Hey, tell me about what's going on with this character right here, or like what's going on with this guy, or like talk to me about this picture. And I would just explore and get them talking about it. And you get a better sense, you know, through letting them speak and giving them a platform to really listen to them. One other thing I was thinking about with anxiety with kids is a lot of times kids, you know, there's some kids are anxious and they're really fidgety, and that can be misinterpreted as ADHD. But I also know a lot of times kids are really anxious and they have a hard time. They're kind of constantly, it looks like they're daydreaming, but it's really they're worrying. And so again, it could present or be perceived by a teacher or by a parent that they're inattentive, that it may be a ADHD symptom. So I think that's a really important, if you ever have concerns about your child having ADHD or your child having anxiety, really again working with a therapist or a psychiatrist to figure out etiology of what's going on, because ADHD often gets overdiagnosed in children that are actually experiencing anxiety.
And I would add to that one of my favorite things to suggest to parents is kind of a nightly journaling thing with, if kids can't write, that they draw a picture and then the parent write out what the picture's about. That gives them kind of an outlet and something that they can start to anticipate that they would do at night. And again, I think that goes back then to what you're saying, Eric, is that if you see the same theme coming up every night, or whenever you're doing the journaling, then that might raise a concern. So it's a good way for kids to draw out if they don't have the words, and also for you to connect with them so that they feel like they can talk to you about whatever's going on. But we do have a question. When pregnant, can your anxiety and the chemical reaction occurring in your body during that have effects on the child you are carrying? Oh, that's a tough one.
I guess what comes up for me is there are studies about how stress and anxiety produce cortisol, and babies washed in cortisol do experience that anxiety and may have effects after they're born. I don't know any more than that, and so I hate to say more because I don't want to induce a bunch of fear, because you can't go through a pregnancy without being stressed. You can't live this life without being anxious. And I think above that, like once you get through the pregnancy and that little person is here, like bonding with them and connecting with them is reparative if they did experience any effects from that cortisol or stress that their parents were under. So I would, do the best you can. If, there are medications that are safe for pregnancy, so you don't have to feel so anxious. The cost benefit, you have to weigh as somebody who is carrying that little person and then has to raise them. But I'm always one to be like, minimize stress where you can, knowing that you can't totally erase it, and focus on staying healthy, eating healthy, and having healthy relationships once the little is here.
Okay. We are almost out of time. Do you all on the panel have any final thoughts about anxiety, managing anxiety disorders? Rhonda, you want to start? Final thought?
For me, hitting kind of the high points that came up for me during the hour, learning more, if this is something you've struggled with, but you've not really dug in to kind of learn what works for you. I think trying some things, and it can get really easy to get overwhelmed even and not knowing where to start with the whole self-care piece, or, how do I breathe and which thing do I do? And so seeing if there's a learning component that could be helpful, just to be able to feel a little more control. Think of that, what can I control? What can I not? Well, one of those is understanding what's happening in my body. And then start with something, and what works today may or may not be effective 6 months or a year from now. But you'll over time, you'll learn more about what resonates with you. We were teasing Eric about some of the things that his go-tos, but it's because he's found really good ones that work for him, and we kind of know, oh, yep, that's what Eric does. So learning more about yourself, and I think approaching it with that curiosity. I think we've hit on that a couple of different ways, but having that growth mindset of what can I learn from this? How can I do it differently? And then adjusting along the way, not being hard on yourself that it's got to be perfect, but just trying some new things and coming to talk to somebody like one of us if it seems like that would be helpful.
Thanks. Terry, what about you?
I'm going to pretty much ditto Rhonda. I think she, summed it up really well. Caregivers worry. We worry about ourselves. We worry about our loved ones. What's going on right now? Are they going to be safe, especially if they're in a care facility? How do we get to see them? How do we get to check on them? So worry is just all over the board right now for everybody. And going back, I'm not going to repeat it because, we'll run out of time, but I'm just going to go back to what, Eric, Rhonda, and Cindy said, check in with your bodies, find things that work, and find support. To me, when you guys were going through, what works for you, knowing that there's a support system out there, just knowing it in my head that there are people that care about me, that I can call, that I can talk to, kind of get those people on a speed dial in your mind. You might not have to speed dial them on the phone, but get them in your mind and kind of have a conversation with them. That's always helped too. So
Thank you. Cindy?
I agree with everything Rhonda said, and I think it is, I'm, happy that this profession provides space for so many different like viewpoints and kind of theoretical foundations. Like Eric is very good at and passionate about mindfulness. That anxiety is really how I found my way to trauma work. I'm like, let me dig up all the things and figure out why this is happening. I think, admit to yourself that, yeah, I'm anxious sometimes. And, if you have children, kind of be open, because I think it's helpful for kids to know that adults get nervous and that we can work through it and live through it. And it's not the end of the world. And if it is, a bigger struggle for you right now, reach out to one of us, because I've said many times, like, you can live with anxiety. You don't have to live in anxiety. And we're here to help if you need it.
Thank you. Eric, what about you?
I would just say that for me, and for I think a lot of folks that I work with at UK, they're high performance people, highly educated, that do a tremendous lot of thinking. And we know that that the mind, that there is a correlation between both intelligence and anxiety. And so I'm always thinking about, how can I engage my sensory experiences and not just live in my head? There's really nice studies that show that the more people's mind, on average, people daydream. The mean is 47% of the time. And the more that people tend to daydream, thinking about either the future or thinking about the past, or defaulting to our favorite story, the story of me, myself, and I, where we do self-analysis, it tends to be overly critical. The more that our mind wanders, the more stressed out we tend to be, the less satisfied we are with life. So really finding ways to engage your physical body, sensory body, to come into your experience as it's happening right now. I'm a big proponent, of course, of engaging nature for these reasons. And then I'll just give one shout out to like movement and music. I have a lot of clients that find a way of grounding themselves, reducing anxiety through different forms of movement like dance or yoga, or through engaging with music. So it really is figuring out what are you interested in, what creates a positive psychological flow state for you.
Thank you. And I will just throw in, just to be really watching out for your kids and your teens right now. They are experiencing stress and worry and some anxiousness just like the rest of us. It might look a little different, but just keep your eye out on them. And if you are not sure if they are or not, give one of us a call, and we're happy to talk you through it and see if they want to come in. And the great thing about our program is the visits are free, they're confidential, and maybe you just come in and you talk it over and say, I'm worried about my kid, or I'm worried about me, and you've got these 5 free visits. So use them. Use us. But anyway, thank you guys for coming. Our next Real Talk will be October 6th, and that will be during Wellness Week. And it's sleep, isn't it?
Yes.
Stress.
Yes.
And we will have a special guest on that day as well. So check back in on October 6th. And if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. So I wish we had some snappy slogan like, we're Real Talk, so you Real Talk. Or
We do have a snappy slogan. It's
spit it out.
where real therapists answer real questions in real life.
Where real therapists answer real questions in real time. Until next month, this is Real Talk. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Oh, goodness. I have to write that down, Cindy. Where'd she go? She bailed on me.
Cindy